that started a campus development of around 500 million. About the same is happening in Trinity now. And the projects on the right I would have been involved in NUI Galway Biosciences building, which recently won AIA award, I think, in the States for energy management. The engineering building with 14,500 square metres near the River Corrib, the Sports Centre, Life Course Institute, and the Hardeman extension. Extensions to old buildings, new buildings, and some renovations of old. My life in Trinity started again in 2015 in January. And I'm in charge now of a unit there delivering about another 500 million over about 10 years, but 250 on the fly at the moment in our new business school, which hopefully will get on site fairly promptly. We've actually made the selection of the preferred contractor for a 45 million euro expat contract. Then we've got our Usheen House development of about 280 student beds across from Pearse Street Garda Station, a Trinity visitor experience for the New Book of Kells, a medium voltage €8 million rewire of the house, and an engineering building, the first phase of which about 20 odd million, the latter phase is about 100 million over the next 10 years. So those projects are scattered across the Trinity campus, which you probably all know, in the heart of Dublin. The red boxes there, our first red arrow on the bottom is the Cran Institute on the corner of Pearse Street and Weston Row. And then you've got our Trinity Bioscience Institute, and further on down TTEC, which is right at the corner of Alta Vetro there in the Grand Canal Dock. So Trinity has quite an extensive holding in the centre of Dublin. So I wanted to talk to you, if I could flick back, because I have a slide in the wrong order unfortunately this morning. Some of the things we've been hearing, I've been hearing as a project manager in these areas and a project leader in these areas, is that our customers probably aren't accepting a zero change policy, even though our government contracts are saying zero changes is what we should be endorsing. Our customers still want to change on the fly. This is very difficult under the construction forms. We are finding it difficult to form the correct teams at the start. It's very difficult to pull together the right quantity surveyors, project managers, architects, engineers. Do you do it in a single point design team? Do you do it in individual commissions? How do you favour SMEs? How do you keep your customers happy knowing that they've got the cream of the crop, the Starchitect they're looking for but they don't want to pay for? So these team members are a very difficult part of the formation we have. You can read faster than I can talk, but the market has also overheated, I'd say, in the last, since 2007, we had a 35 billion euro, I heard Tom Parlin talking about it, industry, dropped down to about between 3 and 7, depending on how you count maintenance. In the bad times, it's popped back up almost immediately to 15 billion. And of the top 10 builders in 2007, only 5 of them are still here as tier 1 contractors. One of them re-entered as a tier 2. That's a destabilised market, no matter which way you look at it. And we are all going to struggle with getting a contractor to do the work we need them to do. And the supply chain they rely on is even worse. So we have a new EU procurement which is helping. The briefing session, I'm going to throw up some Trinity pictures now just to keep people generally entertained. Some ideas we have on briefing. I would suggest that you publish a PIN notice every time you're doing a public works contract, and if you're advising public works clients, get them to publish a PIN notice, and then you have a choice whether to keep it a secret or not that you've published it. If you keep it a secret, you can be regarded as a miracle worker later because you're having all the project times in the ODU notices and the tender periods that you come up with later. You can declare it as a part of your brilliance and your ingenuity that you publish this thing. You also have 52 days within which to do your briefing session. Upon the 53rd day, you can then avail of these halved project timelines in terms of ODU and tender periods. That's a great little tip. I think just throw in a PIN notice. Actually, you can do it on the train. It really is a very simple thing to do. Managing expectations early, I'd like to drop down to that. Something that Nessa talked to as well is about communicating with your customers. If you force communications at your end at the start, the risks don't become your risks, although you're in charge of them. It's now a corporate risk. And it's now a very important thing to do, because in good governance, which we're all getting either layered upon us or we already have in our institutions, your good governance will require you to communicate. If you don't do it, it becomes your problem. So communicate becomes a corporate risk, and you'd be amazed how much life is less stressful. Forming your teams. I think the top tip here for me is to simplify the assessments for teams. I think people who are filling in the forms as consultants and people who are assessing them at our end in the client side find it much easier if you make the criteria brutally simple and you say there's going to be an expert panel composed of people who have 150 years of experience between them. They know what they're talking about. Send in your strategic approach, please. It'll be 30% of the marks, and we'll judge it for you. And we'll give you good feedback at the end as to why your strategic approach may or may not have been as good as the guy who won. If you give yourself 5,422 marks to give over 25 criteria, you're in a hiding to nothing. So just leave it out. Just go for 100%, give 20% for costs if you're assessing consultants, 80% for quality, and make the assessment very simple. Something we do in Trinity is an abnormally low tendering tool. We insert a schedule at the start of our contracts in our tenders now, and we ask at least the PM QS, the project managers and QS teams, to sign up to a minimum amount of hours. And that means there's no shafting and there's no undercutting at that point. We sometimes do it for our single point design teams as well, but that's a bit trickier because those teams can sometimes have multidisciplinary functions. You should become the advisor to your client and the single point of contact if you can. As a project leader, my job is to lead the built environment on projects. Everybody who has done a garage conversion or a loft conversion seems to have an area of expertise in this, and I welcome all of those contributions. But quite frankly, if you want to employ somebody as being the master of your built environment, let them be. And it's your job as the person in the built environment to try and assert yourself in that area. It's not easy. You're auditing. You should have a library that looks like this if you want to keep your audits in good nick. Again, using governance to communicate and don't be overprotective. There's nothing worse than watching a project manager burn because he or she wants to hold on to every single scrap of information on the project. You need to share it, and you need to allow yourself not to be blamed for anything. There are opportunities through good governance to re-baseline your project. It's great to be able to say you delivered your project on time and on budget, but then somebody who knows what they're talking about is able to say, which budget? Which program are you talking about? Is that a re-baseline budget? And you go, oh yeah, it's a re-baseline budget. And that might have only been re-baselined last month. But in fact, the project 3 years ago is very different. So when you can, through good governance, re-baseline your job constantly and consistently, as long as your corporation, your institution agrees with you. And once you've got a re-baseline budget, you now have a new performance measure. And that's a very useful thing for a project manager. It's actually quite a sense of great maturity in an institution to be able to say, we know projects don't go perfectly. But if you communicate with us at the top of the tree, the chief executive officer, or the provost, or the president, or the city manager, to say, the project is going to go a little bit differently from now on, and this is why. You go, okay, that's the new baseline. Sign up to the new baseline, you've got a new program. And then you can deliver on time and on budget with reasonable confidence. You might not look back 5 years, but you can certainly look back a month. Marketplace conditions. This is how I feel now in the marketplace in Ireland. I don't know who's pushed me, and I don't know where I'm going to land, and I can't quite see where the surface of the water is, but I know it's going to hurt. The marketplace at the moment is suffering badly, I think, from an overheating characteristic. I think, unfortunately, pre-tender estimates are now a fantasy. It's very difficult for me to say to my provost that the quantity surveyor's words are going to be gospel and the projects will be delivered within 10% plus or minus. The provost is looking at me saying, well, why are we employing these people? Why am I employing you, Greg? We need to be able to have some certainty. So when you turn around to your contractors and you have your marketplace testing, you do all these fancy things, you look at supply chain, you go abroad, you talk to Ormazoval for low voltage and medium voltage equipment, you talk to Giulini for facades, and you're doing an awful lot of footwork trying to figure out whether your supply chain can support the project you're just about to go to market for. And then they turn around and double the prices at the last minute because they realize they don't have a slot in their production line for when you need the windows in June 2017. But if you do want their slot, you pay an extra $1 million for it. But that sort of stuff is going on right now, and that is really a very dangerous place to be in. We do have a clerk of works model on our campus, and it's a very important one. I think it's probably a very old-fashioned thing to have. And certainly people in the corporations that are, or the councils that are in this room, will know that that's a very important part of our quality control. I would definitely encourage it as a claims mitigation model as well. One thing that the new regulations have allowed us to do is insert the scope for change as part of Regulation 22. When you're sending out your invitation to tender, insert in there somewhere, we think that the project could change at any moment in time as follows. And you list 10 things. It could get bigger, it could get smaller, it could get more complicated, it could have more seats in it, it could have a different tiered lecture theatre. List them all. That means you can then use Regulation 22 very successfully and very easily as a safe harbour for making significant changes on your project. Before these regulations came in, you couldn't do it at all. Another tip as well, if all of your tenders come back and they completely blow the backside out of your budget, they may be regarded as unacceptable tenders. So I'm not a solicitor, so go off and talk to your solicitor. I see one of them in the audience. And I want you to go and ask them, what do they think an unacceptable tender is? And look to the papers that Sue Arrowsmith would have written on unacceptable tenders. And a budget, something that comes back and it completely and utterly blows the budget may be regarded as unacceptable. And therefore, perhaps your solicitor might suggest that negotiation without advertisement could be one of the many things you could look at. Contracts. Sorry, the two fencers there in college, it actually does represent what we do in contracts. And I'll speed up now because this was talked to by JP at length as well. We do welcome the new measures on the interim measures for the public works contract. I think they're a very positive thing for the subcontractors of the country who had themselves gazumped regularly, in fact consistently. And now when they submit a reserve specialist sum to me direct as the client, it's as good as a cheque, and that's fantastic for them. And they have reversed the whole primacy in the marketplace right now, and it's a very positive thing, I think, for them. It adds time to your contract if you're going to use reserve specialists. We did it on the business school just recently. It added 5 weeks to our programme, out of the blue, because of the chicane sequencing you've got to go through to get the paperwork back from the builder, back to the reserve specialist, and back then to the builder again for inclusion in the contract. And if something happens along the line and it upsets the apple cart in the reserve specialist, it can actually affect the score that the builder had in the first place, which could actually change a position in the original main contract tender return. One to watch as well. So watch the timeline for the reserve specialists. You'll hear more today and other speakers today about the legal side of things. But one thing, the only tip I'll give you here is start your affidavits now. When you have a brilliant idea for a new contract, start writing your affidavit the day after, because and start your file, which is, I call it discovery, because there's one thing that'll break your heart is in a legal case is the discovery process, and don't get caught off guard. And obviously the Kildare case has given us a new thing to deal with. Thank you, Kildare, in relation to getting more text into the regulation notice letters to unsuccessful tenderers. We thought we were getting there, but now you probably have to give an essay under every criterion that you're giving back. In fairness, it's fair briefing. Everybody deserves fair briefing back as to why they didn't get a job. But you just now have to be extremely careful of it. We all have to do all of these things, and this is our new claims manager in the office, and she fences and shoots for Ireland. I'm only joking, she's not working for us, but she is in our sports department. I'm not going to talk about insolvency. I don't know whether it's a major issue for us just yet, but we're already starting plans in our office, certainly in my head, about getting insolvency back on the agenda as a major preparation tool. And that kind of reflects my attitude and approach to how risky the marketplace feels right now. And obviously the new project board is a very important part of the new government interim measures. I would encourage you to have 3 on your project board and 3 on the contractors board. It's a very important part of what you're doing. You're still going to be, you're going to have, the contractors still have the scope for a Lazarus style claim at the end of the job, and they can still stitch that in through a variety of different tools. It's something David O'Brien, I know, is trying to deal with as part of the government contracts. Please don't use your notice letters under Clause 10 and so on as a way to communicate with your builder or a way to communicate with your client. Have the project board as a way to say, this is the problem we have, this is the money we're losing, this is where we're going to claim against you because we think you did have bad drawings or bad bills. We're going to send you a Notice 10 letter, and this is how it's going to look. It shouldn't be the first time you hear about a subject when a letter arrives on your desk through the employer's agent. I'd like to talk about insolvency because I've been through one with McNamara. It was a very difficult time for 13 projects around the country. We had 3 of them in Galway. But be careful about inserting a replacement contractor, whether the surety says it's the right thing to do or not, because under the Prestatex rules, you may distort the competition by inserting a contractor that you haven't actually tendered for. Something we found out the hard way after 14 months of thinking about it. And get ready to know when to push the button and terminate the contractor's obligation to complete the works. You're not terminating the contractor. There's a lot of things that survive after the contractor's gone. New challenges we all face: BCAR, BIM Level 2, I'm going to introduce in a second, Bobby Gallagher from DFM, and information that's very important now and it hangs on to BIM. Our new near zero energy building measures coming in, although they're still a little bit of a pipe dream. And what does a polymath project manager look like these days? Hopefully as happy as that, but somebody who can perform due diligence, get it right first time every time. That's what the clients expect. Doesn't always happen, but you have some tips there to try and help you re-baseline projects, so maybe you can actually say you're getting it right each time rather than the first time. You have to be able to adhere to EU legal constraints and keep your college, your employer, your client out of court. You have to make marketplace alliances, and you have to be friends with everybody, but be sufficiently cross in front of the client so that the client doesn't think you're friends with them. You have to stay legal, but you obviously have to make sure that you're not a bureaucrat, because bureaucrats are detestable creatures and a pariah in my office. You have to facilitate SMEs, but at the same time you have to help the OGP. I'm not saying that the OGP don't facilitate SMEs, but you certainly have to be able to get the best price and conglomerate services, minimise your resource input, but facilitate SMEs. That's a tough one to do. Think green, think smart. You have to know all of the buzzwords and terminologies. And if you miss one of these at a meeting, everybody thinks you're incompetent. And that's, I think that's amazing. 25, 30 years of experience and you could be deemed an idiot because you don't know what Muda is. Or a Pokeyoke, or whatever they have in the latest PMI seminars. And you also have to hit your pre-tender estimates with no project surprises. These things are not easy to do, and I don't envy anybody going into the project market. But I'd like to thank you for coming today and for listening to all of the speakers before us. And now I'd like to introduce Bobby Gallagher. If Bobby's, there he is, who's going to come up and talk to another subject. Thank you.